So the challenge for you guys is to go out and find the woman who will select you to create the future population. Now that sounds really eugenic. It's not coming from the culture, it's coming from biology.
Yes.
You're being shit tested from within at the level of the genome. That's where the selective pressure is in now, is will you subsume yourself to this cultural pressure and give up and become extinct, your genome, your gene line become extinct, or will you say no to that and will you find the right kind of woman?
But we talk about archetypes quite a lot today, as we often do.
We have.
Jung To Live By offices.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about how men find themselves attracted or entranced or drawn towards archetypal images of women. I was wondering what you might have meant by that. Maybe there are particular types of women or particular types of images that men might be drawn towards, or is it simply the fact that it's not the real woman? You know, I'm just wondering what prompted this off inside your head.
Well, obviously, clinical experience of it, people coming to us and wanting help with it, and that's probably the most obvious thing to say. But also being trapped by it as well, because obviously no real woman can fulfill an archetype. I mean, that's absolutely the case. And at the end of the day, you know, the trajectory should be towards helping somebody to, if it's a young man, for example, to relate to ordinary women. That's something that's very difficult to do if you're hooked into archetypes and archetypal images all the time.
So, this might be controversial. This concept of femininity
Yes.
in women. So that is a thing, and I've spoken to lots of blokes about that. Actually, not even because of like the consultations or anything like that. It's just in general, and they're like, women aren't feminine anymore.
Yeah.
So, and I feel that. I
Yes.
feel that in a way.
Yes.
Because I would presume that the more feminine, if you like, in that more archetypal sense, more of a distillation of the divine form, as you said before,
Yes.
Steve, the easier it would be to access that through the individual, sort of physical, mortal woman.
Yes.
But if that's on sort of the decay, and you've got women, they're going out, they're holding their VKs and their Alco
Yes.
Pops, and they've got 3 cigarettes in their
Yeah.
mouth, they're going party, you know,
Yeah.
presumably that's it's not inspiring.
No, it's not.
You know?
And I agree with you, absolutely. It's very off-putting, and it makes you wonder really what the quality of the relationship is between those women and their mothers.
Yes,
Because you know, you could only assume at one level that something has been transmitted between the generations that hasn't been helpful for the daughters in some way. Some of that will be culturally determined. But I agree with you, that creates a whole other level of difficulty for young men who are out there looking for their ideal life partner, because it will at least appear on the surface that maybe there's not an awful lot of choice, or the choice that's out there is not exactly ideal. So it begs the question, what do you do about it?
It's a good question.
And it is a good question. And I would probably come back to mothers again, because, you know, in the same way that it's the father that communicates to a son what it means to be a man, then the same is true of women and daughters. And so I think women have to bear, mothers have to bear, again, we talked about mothers before, more responsibility for their own part in these things. I mean, it must be very difficult. I mean, you're a young man, James, obviously, and you know, you'll be seeing these kinds of things out there in the culture, and what would your take be?
Well, yeah, it's on both sides, isn't it? It's like we've got this crisis of young men who need to find their own masculinity, and then you've got this crisis of young women who don't believe in femininity.
Yes.
It seems to be even clear cut as that. Men at least seem to believe in that force beyond them, but it's it's obviously massive cultural forces like you know, the third wave feminism and things like that have contributed to this. Yes. But I mean, obviously you mentioned about mothers, absolutely, and you should, you know, to go back to a proper system of parenting with individual responsibility of mum and dad who are reflexive on themselves, helps the next generation.
Yes.
Obviously people of, say, my age, 24, what the hell can we do about that?
Yeah.
You know, we've grown up, we're past that mimetic stage, if you like, where we're super young and impress upon our parents. What can be done individually then? Unless it's a case of consciously you decide, okay, I'm going to start the journey myself towards discovering what that force of, you know, to be inspired by those archetypal images myself, to become like who I was always intended to be. I don't know how else you could possibly do it.
Do you mean that in terms of how you relate to your anima on the inside as opposed to an outer relationship.
I think both. I think both, actually.
Because of course it is inner and outer.
So to go with inside and check on your own nonsense or accumulated things you've had over the course of your lifespan.
Yes.
But also when you're talking to the woman, she is a distillation of the divine form in some capacity. So you can always access that through her. Yeah. Of course, with the individuation relationship you were talking about earlier, it really highlights that the man and the woman should both be working on themselves in that capacity. It can't be one and not the other, so you should leave the other one behind.
Yeah.
Sounds like an inevitability to me.
Yes, I think so. It's a very difficult one, James, isn't it? I guess my real concern is young men getting trapped in the fantasy of it all. And even when maybe they're in a relationship where all the ingredients are there for them to have a relationship that has longevity to it, that can adapt and develop over time, that nonetheless they may still fall back on archetypal images because of the entrancing power of them, the strength of the pull of archetypal images might still tend to take them away from relationships with actual women. And I think part of being in a long relationship over time is, and again we talked about it in an earlier podcast today, that there has to be a stripping away of projections onto one another. Otherwise, you don't really ever know who you're relating to, and that takes time. It's a process, isn't it? It should be an exciting one. It should be a process of discovery, really, if you enter into it with that frame of mind. But you do have to do it. You do have to do the work. I think it can appear, at least on the surface, to be more comfortable to stay where you are.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but I think all of us have an intuition that you can't stay where you are, especially in today's culture.
Yeah.
It's like, really, I mean, I guess most people aren't. The average person you meet on the street still in the year 2020 might not be, say, clued up about any kind of culture war in a colloquial sense that's happening in terms of things are a bit strange and there's lots of unconscious tensions between different groups of people.
Yes.
But I think, that's the only way to move forward, is to tap into that kind of thing. Of course, we've inherited, my generation, if you like, have inherited this mess from cultural forces. It's not our fault.
No, it isn't. And a lot of it, and we've said many times, has been politicised. And so you're up against something which is, is very, very difficult to resist. But I think it begs the question too, well, what is femininity? Well, what do we mean by that? We use that term a lot, but what does it actually mean? And if we think that to be feminine is to be weak in some way, then we might then sort of think that the obverse of that is to be, for women anyway, to be like pseudo men and to sort of throw our weight around and to try and emulate the ways of men, rather than to see the strengths in what it means to be feminine, to be a feminine woman. And they don't appear to be articulated sufficiently in the culture these days. It's almost as if it's lost currency. And I guess you do have to take a stand as an individual if you want to do something about that.
That's what I'm going to say. Like, you can't do anything else except okay, this is the hand you've been dealt from the culture. You can fix it yourself, and you can fix it yourself. Yeah. People do it all the time, every single day. On femininity, like, one of the reasons we're using the Lady of Shalott is it's that anima image, and it's like, of course that's inspirational to men, and we can go over the edge of the black hole staring at things like that.
Yes, you can.
It's also inspirational for women.
Yes.
So if you really look at those anima paintings, like we've used Ophelia quite a lot as well, it's like there's nothing weak about these women at all. Yes. They have an ethereal quality to them, and it's like, not that I want to follow her, but it's like, there's something you have, obviously I'm projecting it onto you, but you know what I mean, something you have that will complete me in some capacity. No weakness in completion at all.
Yeah, just complementarity. And I think you're right to kind of imply that it's almost an energy thing as well. It goes above and beyond the persona, what a woman looks like in terms of her outer appearance, or even her age particularly. But it's something to do with energy and what you give off as well. And as probably harder to kind of put your finger on, but I think what you're suggesting is that you know it when you meet it.
Yes.
You experience it in that particular way.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you
I'm going to go all biological.
Yes,
it's probably the wrong time to do it, because that was a really good exposition between you two, I think, in terms of the psychology of it. I think it's absolutely right. Those things that, just to pick up on what you said, they will be of genetic origin. Yeah. And it'll be a recognition of that in other people. When they pick up on energy, there's something that suggests about the genome of that person which draws you towards them. So that's important to understand too. So you have both perspectives simultaneously. The biological and the psychological will make your understanding of that complete. If you go either way on its own, you'll have a less complete picture. It's the biology is real, the psychological effect is phenomenologically real. That's what you experience, isn't it? But you mentioned like the Platonic form and all the rest of it. Do you mind if I just introduce a few things?
Yes, of course.
And this is red pill moments again, and no doubt people will spit the red pill out back at me, but that's fine. But the anima is not an inner woman, guys. Sorry, it's not. It's not based on the alleged fact, which is not a fact. Jung was wrong. I'm sorry on this, that men have a minority of female genes. That is not true either. No, where it is genetic, though, is, and he was right about this, and it's obvious from a biological perspective that men are born with their psyches, their psychology attuned to anticipate women, and this is for the twin principles of mate and relate, which will ensure the survival of the genome, of the species, and of the individual to some extent. So yes, you have, and it's the most clear example, if you like, of where an archetype might be biological is in the anima and the animus, but only because it serves Darwin. And then therefore Freud by the time it appears in psychology, and then it serves Adler because of the social adaptation, and then it serves Jung eventually, if you can bring your relationship to a Jungian level, having passed through Freud and Adler along the way, as we said in an earlier podcast. So it's not an inner woman, and it's not based on a man having a minority of female genes. Here's another example for you to ponder on a red pill scale. If a man's unconscious, as it is according to Jung, it has is basically coloured by the anima, that would suggest, because the unconscious is vast and immeasurable in scale, that the vast majority of a man's psychology is actually feminine, if you have an inner woman. And if the anima is an inner woman, that means women are men and men are women, really. And what you get on the surface in terms of ego consciousness is a tiny part of their personality and a tiny part of their genome. Clearly that's nonsense. What you have on the inside is, as he said, he is right here, a biological anticipation of the other. And the thing that Jung called the anima tends statistically, in statistically normative males, that doesn't exclude the variation or invalidate it in any way, but it tends to be projected onto women for mate and relate, for biology and for social relating reasons. That's why. So yes, men do have, where the anima is concerned, an inner image, which Plato discovered, you could argue, and called the Platonic form, and it is virtual, as Plato suggested and Jung believed, in the sense that it is generic. There is a baseline image, and social psychologists have figured this out. I mean, and they're about the lowest of the low in terms of being contributing to anything in terms of value to psychology. Academic social psychologists. But they've figured out that there are certain factors which will attract a man to a woman, but of course they're biological anyway and underpin the social psychologist's appreciation of what they're observing. So yes, there is a virtual image which produces this baseline. And believe it or not, it's not that attractive actually. It's so generic, you can, as Plato understood, find all women in that image to some extent, or certainly an acceptable genetic bandwidth that you will want to relate to. But the summation of all of that is, for Plato, in a philosophical and proto-psychological sense, the virtual image of the anima, and that then becomes Jung's concept of the anima. But it's biological in orientation, and The same is true for the animus. It's there for that purpose. When it's personified as the opposite sex, but the relating function, which is anima or animus, is much bigger than that, and it includes relationships to yourself on the inside, to ideas, to beliefs, to creativity. The anima operates in all of those areas, as does the animus as well. These so-called archetypal images then are the closest you will get to genuine, pure, biologically imprinted archetypal images, because they have that generic diffuse quality within which you could distill out from any woman. That's a true archetypal image, true platonic form. You can get any woman out from that image. If you look hard enough, she emerges. But if you look slightly to one side, you'll see she doesn't really look like anybody I know. And not even that attractive, but there's something there. That something is the innate release mechanism, as ethologists understand it, to the sign stimulus of the image, which releases your interest in the object of that image, which correlates with your biological drive to mate and relate. That's the fundamental dynamic. Everything after that is an add-on to that. Doesn't invalidate the add-ons, but it is the support that holds all of that up and gives us our impetus to behave and to go out and to seek actualization in relationship to a woman like that. At the moment, as James and Pauline have been saying, you've got this terribly degrading, this catabolic social structure, particularly in the West, where the identity of women and of men is being eroded, homogenized, disrupted in all sorts of ways. That is biological shit testing on a grand scale.
Yes.
Something will emerge from that. It will have to, because otherwise the alternative is extinction. And if you think about that on an instinctive level, it will only degrade so far, and there will be a kickback. The problem, or the only question, is how far will it degrade? And how many people will be affected by it? In the same way that in past generations they were affected by world wars and there was mass casualties and culling of breeding populations, now it's being engendered by the society, by the culture itself, as if the culture knows what it's doing. But there is probably a fundamental biological drive to shit test the genome by itself, which is expressed through psychology and through culture, and then it's going to see who is going to make a stand against this particular challenge. And those men who can, and those women who can breed and who can go forward into the future, they will inherit the earth. The others won't. So the challenge for you guys is to go out and find the woman who will select you to create the future population. Now that sounds really eugenic. It's not coming from the culture, it's coming from biology.
Yes.
You're being shit tested from within at the level of the genome. That's where the selective pressure is in now, is will you subsume yourself to this cultural pressure and give up and become extinct, your genome, your gene line become extinct, or will you say no to that and will you find the right kind of woman? And that's why you're being drawn to these images of ultra feminine in a platonic sense, and by that I mean a platonic form, not that misunderstanding of what platonic love is. That is something completely different. Platonic love is not asexual, it's in addition to sexuality. It is the transcendent, as you were saying,
that's
Paul,
what I was saying earlier,
in an individuation relationship that builds upon that. It is not the exclusion of sexuality, platonic
not
love.
At all.
It is, as James was saying, the worship of the divine form of the feminine. At a psychological level, at a biological level, it's pushing you to create the future biologically. If you don't compete now, you will be doomed to extinction. That's what you're being put under. That's the pressure. Just as my father's generation was put under pressure of being killed in the Second World War, and my grandfather was put under pressure of being killed in the First World War, and so on back. This is the shit test that's been thrown at you guys today. This is the selective pressure that's coming from biology. Even if these politicians think that they're doing it, they're being manoeuvred collectively by the collective genome to find the best people who are prepared to combat the pressures of the day and to move on.
It could be absolutely disastrous for so many people, though.
It will if they don't wake up,
especially for women. And then, so what if a certain amount of the population, say, of women realise, actually, I'm 40 years old now,
and they've actually missed their best reproductive years.
Well, what's going to happen then in terms of the politics is going to keep going and going and going and going.
Yeah.
In fact, some women have actually sacrificed their biology for it, haven't they? They've actually made, a conscious decision. It's not really conscious at all, but they've made a decision not to have children. And a lot of that has been socially and culturally determined, rather than, you know, a decision that they've come to themselves in some kind of considered way. But if you don't mind, I was just going to ask you, Steve, do you think that men have fallen back on the idea of the anima and almost an over-reliance on it as an inner thing, and therefore they don't want to relinquish this idea of there being an inner woman, because what's out there is not right for them in some way?
That's a good point, and I think that in that you can see a mythological trap which you get in fairy tales and myths, that you're presented with a fact, which is the fact that you've described, and there's actually two choices there, and if you take the wrong choice, it'll be self-defeating. If you fall back into the fantasy and the fascination of the image, it could paralyse you and you'll do nothing, because you'll say there is no woman out there like that.
That's what I mean.
That's the dark side, if you like, of the choice you're being presented with mythologically, so to speak, right now. The other side of that equation, which will balance it, and that's where it's productive, is saying, that's my ancestral memory. That's where I should be going. That's who my great-grandfather's great-great-great-great-grandfather would have understood and recognised, and his genes are in me, and they're pushing me to actualise that out in the world against all odds. That's the competitiveness, that's the Darwinian element, that's the choice. That's you picking up your sword from the stone and becoming a man, not being fascinated and pulled away by saying no woman can face up to this. And understanding the anima then, not as an inner woman, but as a relating function that will allow you to complete yourself in other ways than just mating and relating with the biological opposite sex. It means to complete yourself fully and creatively, financially, whatever it might be, out there in the world, maximise your genomic potential. But, you know, relating to that inner image is important, but do not be hypnotised by it. Learn from it, utilise it as a prompt for your development in the outer world.
I mean, I thought James's reaction was interesting when you said earlier on that, you know, that there is no inner woman in a man, and it was almost one of disappointment.
Well, we were saying earlier about sort of like jokes masking things, stuff like that. That was obviously, well, it was a joke, but also it's like, well, I get it. I've been there as well myself before, spoken to many people. It's like, even like pornography, for example. When you get, you know, the women that you see are perhaps actually having their bodies physically augmented to appear more desirable. It's like, well, where is that desirability? Where's it rooted within us for them? Well, it's right down in the genome again.
It is, it's instinct.
So of course in that context, and then it's like, well, you know, take the whole personal equation into the whole personal context into account. It's like, I can't go out there and talk to these women because of X, Y, Z reasons. I'm going to turn towards the women in my imagination, the women in the stories, the women on my dodgy smart websites.
And that's the cathexis of libido that Freud talked about, and it ducks off into pornography and satisfies instinctive pressure, but it doesn't, because it doesn't complete the instinctive goal, which is why you have to do it again and again, and that's the repetition compulsion, which adds up to being porn addiction. It's as simple as that. And if you address your relationship to women in the outside world, that's the challenge. That's where you have to pick up your phallic sword and go out and do something with it. You will not have that interest in pornography. And as for masturbation, that's a normal release of biological energy. It's preparation. You have that build-up to impel you to act it out in the world competitively. That's what it is for. That's its instinctive pressure. If you think of that in an archetypal sense, you'll just lose the plot. You'll get hypnotised by images and by fantasies, and you'll miss it. You'll miss what's actually happening inside you.
Thank you for watching this episode of Jung To Live By. If you haven't already, make sure you download our free PDF for integrating your shadow. It includes the most advanced theory on the topic available anywhere on the internet, as well as a full practical breakdown. If you've ever wanted to integrate your shadow, this is honestly the way to do it. Thanks again for watching, and take care.